Well, welcome everyone, and thank you for joining FIOP's Ask Me Anything on integrating veterans back into the workforce. Tonight's conversation is about more than transition as a general concept. We're talking about what it means for veterans to move from military service into civilian workplaces and what organizations and IO professionals like us and other leaders can do to support that transition well. As an IO psychology organization, FIOP is especially interested in the systems, structures, and workplace conditions that shape whether people are able to thrive. And tonight, we will explore veteran transition through that lens. I am Cam Dunson. I'm the board chair for FIOP this year. And with me are Dr. Derek Moore and Dan Snyder. Dr. Derek Moore served 20 years in the United States Marine Corps, celebrating three combat deployments. I hope those weren't celebratory. Sorry about that. He now serves as director of the Joint Military Leadership Center at the University of South Florida, where he supports approximately 600 students across military-affiliated programs and more than 50 active duty staff and cadre members. His work sits at the intersection of military leadership, education, student development, resilience, and public sector leadership. Welcome, Dr. Derek Moore, and thank you for your service. Dan Snyder served 31 years in the U.S. Navy, including roles across Naval Special Warfare and as Command Master Chief of Special Boat Team 20. He completed 11 overseas deployments and now serves as Senior Director of Programs for the Honor Foundation's Tampa campus, where he supports transitioning members of the U.S. Special Operations community as they clarify purpose, build confidence, and move into meaningful post-military careers. So we are so excited to have these two speakers who bring both lived experience and professional expertise into the conversation. Dr. Derek Moore brings the lens of military service, higher education, student development, and resilience, and Dan Snyder brings decades of Naval Special Warfare leadership and now works directly with transitioning service members through the Honor Foundation. Thank you both men for your service to our country and to our veterans. And I think we have another guest to admit, so I'm going to bring in. So my first question is for Dan. Dan, in your work with the Honor Foundation, what are some of the first things transitioning service members need to process before they even get to the resume or the job search stage?
Yeah, great question. All too often, I think veterans in the transition space want to run to the resume, if you would. And that's one of the biggest misconceptions, that transition is not just about the resume. It's an integral part of the process, but more importantly, before they even begin to work with the resume, they need to start with their identity. If you think about it, for many veterans, especially those in high-performing or close communities, the military was just never a job for them. It was purpose, it was tribe, it was mission, structure. In a lot of ways, being in the military is your identity. And before someone can effectively articulate their value to any employer, they have to first understand who they are outside of the uniform. Some of the things that veterans really need to process, and what we tend to target early on, the first month in the Honor Foundation, we don't even talk about job industries, lanes of industry. We talk about, who am I? What are your preferences? What motivates you outside of service? Kind of things do I want build next in my second professional career? And then what are those strengths that I naturally lean into and bring to an organization or a team? And then what does work outside of uniform look like as they move forward? I think that sometimes veterans need a permission to understand that the transition isn't a vulnerability. That's one of the things we'd like to talk about, or it's losing anything. It's a transformation. It's more than just transition. You're not losing value because of the uniform comes off. You're learning how to translate all those incredible skills that you developed over a career in uniform into a value going to be utilized in a different environment.
Yes, thank you. And you yourself were a client of the Honor Foundation. Is that correct?
Yes, I was. I joined the military when I was 19 years old, 1990, straight out of high school. Spend the full summer off. I went straight into the military, and The only job I ever had when I was in high school was washing dishes at a Greek restaurant. I've never had to apply for it. I didn't really interview for it. My friend had it and then needed a replacement, and he told them I was a good fit. So they hired me right away. I had done a resume. I had never done interviews. And I challenged for something. It required, different commitment out of me, whether it was a physical selection process, whether it was psychological exams going into the NSW community, and physical fitness selection and training platforms that last months and months on end. So when I got to that point in my life where the inevitable was coming, I was going to retire from the military, doing some real hard introspective stuff on myself, just kind of what I was going to be interested in. And everything I had thought about my career didn't translate into the private sector, right? Everything I had done in the naval special warfare space seemed very paramilitary. And that's not something I wanted to do, especially at 50 years old when I was leaving. So I seeked out some sort of third-party nonprofit to help me through the process. And luckily, I came across the Honor Foundation, where they helped me reframe who I am, bring clarity to what I do. And then they challenged me in the things I was interested in, which I really had to think about. And one of the areas that I found I have a lot of passion for is the nonprofit space, the education space, adult education in particular. And I like being around people. Sounds very obvious, but at that time in my life, it was far away as the moon to me. You knew it was out there, but you just didn't really know how to get there.
That's a good testimony of that value of that organization. From your work at USF with military affiliated students and staff, what are some of the adjustment points veterans experience when moving into less structured environments like higher education or civilian workplaces like that?
Yeah, that's a great question. Following Dan, is it great examples of leadership like that, 31 plus years in the military, right? So I think one of the biggest adjustments points that veterans experience when they transition into higher education or those civilian workplaces, from a highly structured, mission-oriented environment, more ambiguity as well as that individual autonomy. I mentioned in the military, they have these expectations, we have those standards, we have the accountability piece, we have those leadership structures that are very clear. That defined chain of command, the shared mission focus, as well as that culture that is built around the teamwork, the discipline, as well as that immediate feedback that we know for time in service. Veterans leave and they enter environments such as like civilian workplaces, to recalibrate their approach to how they speak, traits. They have to take what they brought military and bring it into a culture that doesn't really understand us as a person. Their personal identities as well. Education, for example, expected to self-manage their time, themselves, navigate very difficult and complex systems that may not provide them that direct guidance or structure. Another adjustment point, translate in our military experience, a civilian language, recognizing that value of the skills that we have possessed in service, and trying to mimic that to what the civilian workplace has. As veterans, we bring exceptional leadership, adaptability, that resilience, problem-solving abilities. May underestimate how those skills are transferable military contexts. Role at USF, I see many veterans successfully navigate this transition by finding their community very early on. Center, the Office of Veteran Success on campus, that is tailored for veterans to come in to build that common bond and then give them the resources necessary to translate any of those skills. Like Dan said, they want to tackle that resume challenge first. They're like, no, not yet. Let's let you incorporate it into civilian lifestyle. Let's start having you speak, get that communication skill that civilian work has, so we can kind of the jargon that we are used to 20 plus years in the service, 4, 8, 12, whatever it might be, to help navigate the system in which we see it today. I think there's really an important mindset shift during our transition period. Military success is often measured collectively, and directly to mission accomplishment. Higher education and some civilian careers can feel very much more individualized and less clearly defined. If we find ways in helping veterans understand that their military identity is not something they can leave behind, but something that they can build upon, I think can often really be a key part of their successful transition.
Yeah. The transferable skills that veterans bring to the workforce, I've seen it personally on site visits as a consultant. You've seen brand new employee step in a large, busy logistics center and command tremendous loyalty from her direct reports, just from those leadership skills she learned in the military. Heard during an exit interview, he was a conditioning repair person on a factory floor, and laid out a brilliant 30, 60, 90-day leadership development program for recognizing high potentials and tapping them for leadership in the organization. I wanted to tell him to go get a doctorate in HR, but he was going to study HVAC repair. And it really is, if you can, as organizations, if we can tap into that, if we can get that talent into our organizations, it really does pay off. For of you, what do you wish more civilian organizations understood about what veterans bring to the table?
I'll jump in first, get a break here. I think some of what Derek highlighted is kind of this, is that some of the biggest things organizations typically misunderstand is that veterans aren't just simply trained to execute tasks. They're trained to solve problems, adapt under pressure, lead people, and operate in uncertainty. And they do that in multiple arenas and different levels. So many veterans come from environments where focus, things like that, they're not just buzzwords to them. They're part of their daily survival, their requirements. And they learn quickly and they develop incredible abilities to make decisions with incomplete information typically. And they know how to prioritize under stress. And you think a lot of times they maintain composure in those difficult situations. Can be misinterpreted as being aloof, but really they're in control and they're calm in that situation. All that, and not some sort of monolith, right? Organizations sometimes veterans think the same, we lead the same, we do everything the same because it's some sort of institutional framework that turns us into drones or something. But the reality is that the veteran community is incredibly diverse in their experience, their backgrounds, their personality, obviously skill sets, and persons and individuals. So they all have their own personal aspirations on either what they want to do in their uniform service and then what they're looking to do in a career afterwards. Like you were saying, Cam, they may want to just do HVAC, or they want to be around people, or like in my case, they want to continue to serve in some capacity. Wish that many organizations could understand how valuable the humility and coachability aspect of veterans are population. Most service members spend years learning how to adapt to new teams, new missions, new leadership on a continuous basis. And that adaptability becomes a huge asset, I think, in any organization, because it presents a flexibility that has been taught if it's over a short period of time, but especially over a long period of time. I'll just say this. I think the best organizations don't hire veterans for the optics because it looks good or it's good to have a veteran program internally. Actually support that brand initiative. Recognize that veterans bring and can strengthen their culture. They improve their team cohesion and their accountability, and they lead many times effortlessly, but very through kind of ambiguity, and become a force multiplier that sometimes is underestimated and underrated at the very beginning.
Yes. How about you?
Yeah, some really good points. I think one thing I wish more civilian organizations understood, and said it right, we bring far more a civilian workplace than technical and military experience. We also bring that mindset that is centered on what Dan said, accountability, the adaptability piece, that service to something larger than who we are. It's the overall organization that we have trained to embody throughout our time in service, whether it's 1, 2, 3, 4 years, however many years they spend in the military. I'm sure Dan as well. I learned very quickly how to lead under pressure. people from very vast different backgrounds in different countries who might be seeking citizenship through that way of military service, mission focused, even in on very uncertain environments and time of deployments. You never know what was going to happen, but we had to be able to adapt to the situation and think very quickly on our feet, right? Those specific skills, like Genshin, you can't just teach an individual person how to learn how to do those skills. Those are something in which we just kind of things that we learn through our time in the military of what makes us different and very just unique individuals coming out of service. I think really adaptable learners in which we are in our environments. I think transitioning service, whether it's education or different career sectors, constant adjustment. And what we know greatly, we move every 2 or 3 years. We had to adapt to new duty stations on the fly, different people, different leadership skills. That takes a lot of patience, for lack of better words. It takes a lot of skill set and just adaptability to be able to understand the nuances and how different bases work within the system, within the Army system, Navy, Marine Corps, or Space Force systems. We all operate different mindsets at each different location. So having that adaptability to go in and learn something new and adjust on the fly is very critical to making sure that you just don't mistake us for what Dan said, monolithic. And we're just very broad in how we are as individuals.
As IOs, we talk a lot about what we call VUCA environments. Do they talk about that in the military? Is that a phrase? Volatile. Yes.
Absolutely.
Okay. It may have originated with the military. I'm not sure. But yes, like you've got a populace of people who have adapted and learned to adapt over and over again to those type of environments. Every business feels like they're in that type of environment now. I don't know that they all genuinely are, but they certainly all feel it. For both of you, what does an organization need to have in place before it's ready to integrate veterans well? They need more than just a sign on the door.
Yeah. Just keep the rotation going, Derek.
Yeah. Tag, you're right.
Perfect. Hiring veterans is not the same as integrating veterans into your organization. Organizations that are truly ready and need more recruiting to have veterans inside their organizations, they need, I think, deeper recruiting pipelines. One of the things that really helps the veteran those structured systems where there's mentorship, education, intentional onboarding with clear expectations, and a culture understands that service members that are in transition, but they're also professional and they're human. Also add to that, one of the biggest things that organizational hiring managers can do in training staff and the leaders to better understand the military experience, where the service member is coming from. I think too often companies hire veterans but fail to help their managers what those veterans are bringing to the table. And that creates, I think, sometimes a disconnect early on. And you come from an environment where you strive for relevance. We want to be relevant within our unit. We want to be relevant within our organization. We want to be relevant within our skill set. And obviously, we want to be relevant and reliable on the battlefield. So I think integration for most institutions would come with some level of clarity. Where veterans often thrive would be places where you could have clear expectations, purpose, accountability, communication, diverse leadership. You don't need to become military like us. I'm not saying that. You don't have to even adopt that way of doing business. But they do, I think, need to have some sort of level of consistent leadership that has an intentional communication for veterans and for their staff when they're coming in. Mentorship groups. I spoke at many local Tampa businesses that have veteran programs internal, and you have these common things. They'll have mentorship groups, they'll have peer connections, sort of career path pipeline for the veterans to pursue, but they won't talk to them about integrating into the culture of the organization. It's veteran can assimilate into pretty much anything, but when leaders are actively checking in during that first 90, 120, 180 days while a veteran's on board, they become more comfortable with other. And then the organizations that I think do that well tend to have a longer retention of service members with greater performance, population of veterans who are coming in who feel connected and valued and understood early on, so they become greater contributors. Culture, at the end of the day, for veterans are looking for the same culture, but a similar culture where relevancy, accountability, leadership, and communication matters.
Excellent. Derek?
Dan, I'm gonna need you to get out of my head because it's a very dangerous spot. Organizations really must move beyond simply saying they support veterans. We hear it all the time. I'm sure Dan has heard it like so many years here. The Tampa Bay community, it's one of the biggest veteran populations out there in the country, San Diego. And we have to learn that it's to create an environment where veterans feel understood, like Dan had mentioned, and really set up for long-term success. I think from my experience, and probably from Dan's experience as well, like on that successful integration starts with the internal culture, that recruitment piece. You need that leadership buy-in from the top down, and not just exist only at that HR level or just as a checkbox initiative. We need to generally understand the challenges that we face during our transition, being able to recognize the strengths that we have and those strengths that we can bring to the organization. I said it, right? Organizations need that mentorship within their communities. One of the things I think many veterans miss after leaving the military is really that built-in sense of belonging, was that shared mission. I knew what we were doing, no matter where we were, what time of the day it was. We knew exactly what we were doing every day of the week, right? I don't expect organizations to kind of aim, but I think having a mindset that that sense of belonging as well as a shared mission, it'd make us stand out a lot more and feel like we are valued within those companies. Way too many times, right? Veterans are not a monolithic group, right? Every veteran's experience is different depending on service, what job they served in the military, deployment history. As you saw, Dan, you did 11 combat tours. I did 3, right? Structure, where we fell in the hierarchy, invest those supervisors and those leaders at the top in those organizations. Military culture can help avoid some of those stereotypes that we've probably seen during that time. Culture usually, I would say, have a more successful at building that trust as well as the communication within the veteran population.
Yes. Bill, did you have a question? You had your hand raised a moment ago.
Well, I had a comment, if I may. A consultant for several decades to organizations and to management. Fully half of the managers that I've worked with over that period of time have made a comment that's something like this: management would be a great job if it wasn't for the people. And when you talk about acculturated to the organizations they come into, my suggestion would be that in a lot of organizations, veterans who have got a lot of training in leadership and experience in leadership might in fact be most valuable improving the culture of the organization that they've joined. Comments?
No, I agree with you wholeheartedly, Bill. I had the opportunity with the Honor Foundation, not just to interact with the veterans in the transition space, but one of the things we do is we connect the veteran industries and partners within the community. And a lot of time, as part of our service, we don't just out and find new careers, but we stay with them for life. So we're always reaching back to them to see how they're doing, see if they're like a place to pivot, and if they're having a lot of success, if they want to send the elevator back down and share their story. And kind of, because one of the things the veteran really likes is lessons learned, right? And we want to avoid the pitfalls of those who've walked the path before us. What I tend to hear back a lot from the business side of things is after they got a sense of what the veterans what they were about, and they realized that they're all into the organization, that it's not just a 9-to-5 identity, but they're actually, fully assimilating themselves into it. They tend to, of the cracks, if you would, within culture, and tend to shore them up, because you mentioned it earlier, about good order and discipline. Why the battlefield works so well for the American military is because of good order and discipline and clear roles and responsibilities identified on the onset. And then there's good training, of course, and things like that. But these aren't superhuman people. It's just they're very well organized and very well led. And there is a culture involved of belief and buy-in to why it is we're doing what we're doing. We talk about a commander's intent. Make sure you understand the commander's intent. If you know your organization's mission, whether it be Morgan, Amazon, or whatever, then that veteran then understands what the intent of the organization is, and they can lead through that. That's one of the reasons why they also tend, in my experience here in the Tampa Bay area, they tend to kind of some of those mid-level, senior level leadership roles.
Yeah. You're talking about alignment with organizational goals.
Right.
Yeah. And the data that I've seen suggests that about half of most civilian employees, half of their work time is spent doing things that don't contribute to the organizational goals. Because you talked about being responsible, and think about the comments that I've heard about teamwork. Go into the civilian workplace and ask people what makes a good team member. They're likely to say somebody gets along with other people. I disagree with that. I think a good team member is a person that you can count on to get their work done and get it done well. And we can work on the other part if we have to. I don't know. Those are just some observations and some thoughts.
Derek, did you have anything to add?
No, it's buying into that command culture and the commander's intent of ensuring everybody's on board. We're known for that, regardless of whether we like the mission or not. We still have to have the buy-in from our employees and the people we work with. Important. We have to just let them know the understanding is that, hey, this is the mission set forth from above, and we just go and execute it. And you don't like that work, like you said, Bill. My employees don't like me, but you get to do a job, and the job's there. There's time for fun, but there's also time to work. And that they come in, they work hard. If you work hard, you go a little bit earlier. You don't have to stay here, but about risk and rewards for ensuring your employees understand the mission of the commander at the top. So that's a good point.
I appreciate your connecting the identification with the mission of the organization to that sense of belonging. That's very insightful for someone who's not a belonging researcher. That was one of the 5 components, and it's even debated amongst researchers, but you've just given me more evidence that one of my components of belonging is, in fact, and I had wondered where the military got this strong sense of belonging. Hear it in their voices. You could interview them, their faces, especially if they've come back from deployment and they're still in the military, they're missing that. Whatever there was in Afghanistan that there was to miss. I never understood that part, but missed that. And a lot of it is that connection and that belonging. It's more insightful than some researchers. For both of you, you've both spoken in different ways about the importance of resilience and structure, accountability, expectations, belonging. From an industrial organizational psychology perspective, where should we focus our attention most when supporting veteran integration? Having veterans build resilience for the transition, or helping organizations build the right environment, or making sure that both are happening at the same time? Just from the standpoint of who is working within the organization to set up the systems, where do you see the importance?
So Dan, think about it. So going back to school to get my PhD, don't ask me why. My first doctorate is a practitioner based. I feel like being in higher ed, everybody has that PhD. So I felt a little bit in military, it's never be good enough to do something. So I really, when I first came to the University of South Florida, I had that imposter syndrome, like I have a PhD, but I'm still a doctor. They're like, but everybody has a PhD. So I ended up going back to school to make a long story short. But my next dissertation that I have in mind, and what I want to do, is resiliency and how veterans transition into higher education, and do a really comparative analysis between them and just your traditional student. To answer your question, I think the answer is clearly both, right? Industrial organizational professionals, I think, focus only on that veteran resiliency without examining the organizational environment. Again, this is just my opinion. We can always chat about it if you want. But I feel like they risk placing that entire burden of the adjustment period for veterans on the veteran themselves, right? Experience, I'm sure, found that veterans really are incredibly resilient, right? They have operated really in a high pressure environments and adapt to constant change. We mentioned that before. And there's a ton of responsibility for 18, 19, 20-year-olds, right? We're leading people through combat tours in Afghanistan, Iraq, wherever you insert country, right? I think the question is often less about whether veterans can adapt and more about really whether that organization is prepared to leverage support their talent effectively, right? I think resilience still matters. When we do transition, it's a huge identity shift, right? Moving from a culture, you have this culture over here with a very strong sense of structure, shared purpose, expectations, and you go into an environment that's unknown, right? A lot differently. There's less structure, or no matter, very less structure depending on where we're at, right? And I think just helping veterans build that confidence and translating their skills, navigating the civilian systems, which I'm sure Dan and his group do, which is amazing. I can't wait to just do over coffee one day, but it gives us that renewed purpose, which is very important for that veteran as they go out and be resilient and understand how to navigate the complex.
I think that you both have landed in nonprofit purpose-driven. Daniel,
Yeah.
what were you?
Sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
No, I was asking you, what were you going to say?
Well, no, I think Derek nailed it. I also believe it has to be both. Historically, a lot of conversation has been focused almost entirely around on helping veterans adapt, and resilience absolutely matters. However, veterans need tools for navigating that identity shift. You're coming from a place where the uniform is an identity piece, the rank on the uniform is an identity piece, and they're not just identity, they're expectation components as well. Identify leadership, qualification, capability, technical expertise, all that stuff. I can walk up to anyone in uniform and tell you what their technical training is, about their level of leadership, what to expect. And a lot of times I can tell you what kind of technical, tactical, or operational experience where they've used that, because we have all these things that reveal that, and then you learn that in that space. In the private sector, unless you CEO, COO, or who the directing manager is, not wearing a uniform that identifies that, right? So there's also a bit of a change in communication. It's not so much in context as much as it is just how things are seen and received. And then you think also back on the organizations, they have to be willing to examine their own environment, their systems, their leadership behaviors. You put all the burden on the veteran if they don't, and then this is one of the reasons many veterans pivot in such a short amount of time after leaving service in their first role. It usually has nothing to do with compensation, benefits, things like that. It's that they just don't like the leadership, or they don't like the leadership style, or feel like the communication is there where they have a clear understanding of the expectations put on them, because they've always had that. And I think where the IO community and you professionals are so uniquely positioned to that gap, I think you understand the human behavior and the organizational systems. And some of the healthiest approach is just having a reciprocal adaptation between the veteran and the civilian environment.
I like to second that. It's you want people to fit into the organization. A lot of times it's the organization that has the problems, and the organization that would benefit by changing. And in particular, to change by learning how to utilize the skills, especially the leadership skills that you're going to be bringing.
I agree 100%. I think where they create systems where both can succeed together is probably the most idealistic spot, landing in place for most veterans. But I think where the organization can really benefit, a well-written organization that has flexibility and wants to bring in a good breadth of talent, have a solid onboarding process. Structure is everything. Identity and ownership like into the organization. So building that psychologically safe environment, those safe teams, them as there's something from outer space or from another country. They speak the same language. One of my favorite things I hear from business leaders who are interested in learning more about the veteran community, they're like, man, I really have a hard time learning their language. I'm like, it's the same language. It'd be like if I went into a hospital room and listened to surgeons in surgery, I would not understand when my realtor, to me, when I'm investing and it was breaking it all down about the different financing and taxes and where all these different, that was all alien to me, but yet it was like, I would understand that, right? So just take time to learn and appreciate and understand the context, because you're all speaking the same things. You'll tend to find out, and you're probably going in the same direction. I think organizations benefit from stronger leadership behaviors. You're more transformational. Doesn't everything has to be leadership models? Yes, it's a popular term, but be transformational. It's one of the things I think that the military leaders, especially the leaders that I've worked for, times where they're servant leaders, there's times where they're authoritarian. The environment dictates how they show up, and that's appreciated. And if you're consistently that way, no matter whether it's or just a environment, I think veterans typically are like, well, I don't know where I stand, or I don't know what the emphasis and what we're doing next. Way to measure integration and creating cultures. We've talked about all that, but is another thing I think that's also important for veterans. Authenticity without feeling like they must suppress that veteran part of who they are. Assimilation, or it should not be assimilation. Excuse me, I misspoke there. It shouldn't be assimilation. It should be more true general integration, like you would anyone else.
Yeah, to the things that you all are saying, a positive onboarding experience, thorough expectations and accountability of follow through on that, sense of belonging, the need for not only recruit and have a brand that we support veterans, but to actually and have some supports in place they come in. Just in a lot of ways, best practices for everyone. And I wonder if they're able to sense and articulate the lack of those things better than most people. I wonder if veterans are in the coal mine. So what else do we miss? Oh, excuse me, Dr. Moore, in places where a veteran center doesn't exist, what might this support training look like in an organizational context where there is no Derek Moore?
Or Daniel Snyder, right? I think resilience training in itself within really starts at creating systems of support, as we already had mentioned a million times. I think the support is the big piece. Organizational culture, right? Just housed in one single office. I think it just needs to be wide throughout their organization. Like, support really needs to be embedded with everybody in every department. Just from my experience, I think resilience is strongest connected in our environments. I know when I got to USF, we're a very military-friendly school, so I had no issues. And I mentioned about people are trying to stealth us coming into an organization. We're automatically going to shell out. We're going to kind of focus on who we are. We're going to feel like we're just being, in military sense, is being beaten out of us, for a lack of better words. But our whole identity, it's Daniel, for instance, 31 years. You just can't take 31 years out of an individual who has served in a structured environment. Recently worked for an organization that wanted to beat a mind switch really quickly, and it was very hard because the leadership was like, you can't be that person. You have to change immediately or else. Like, it's just a bad, toxic work environment where he's 6 months removed from military service. So it was like, well, we're like, spent 20 years of the majority of my adult life. You want me to change who I am for your leadership and organization that's not willing to adapt and put necessary resources to make me feel welcome and have that onboarding and learn the ropes or whatever it might be, right? But I think in practice, it look like some of those mentorship programs is very heavily, has a ton of veterans embedded in their community, which I really appreciate. There was not one time being on campus that I felt insecure of who I was, and not just being able to say, hey, when I was in the military, because it was that appreciation that I know they would feel, and the questions would start rolling from there. We have a ton of good peer support networks. So maybe having an organization that has either veterans within the networks of that organization to bring on and to be able to help and mentor those transitioning servicemen or women into that organizational culture. I think resilience training really should not focus on that coping mechanism, as we say, right? It's too many times that people are like, let me just tell you to cope with the learning structure here at this organization and insert whatever, right? For us, you can't just take out 20 plus years of service in individuals who have this lifestyle that we know we're going to get up at 05, we're going to go to PT, you come back and shower, you have breakfast, you start your day. Everything's so routine. Possess a high degree of resiliency already. The goal should really help us or the veterans coming into the civilian workplace, a new context, while their transition can involve uncertainty. A lot of times you don't want to accept the fact of uncertainty, especially as military service members, because we know every day our routine, we know exactly what we're doing. We know what uniform we're putting on, and now we have to put on a suit, or now we have to put on a business casual, whatever it might be. It's a lot for somebody to be able to transition, to understand who we are as I'm Derek, I'm not insert rank last name, right? So it's a lot for us to be able to make that change. So,
Dan, anything?
No, I think Derek's right on top of it. We spent our careers knowing, be at the right time, right place, right equipment, with the right formation and the right uniform, and all that stuff is understood and it's taught to you. And then you get in some of these places where kind of out idea, and veterans will, but typically they'll go even more layers deep than the organization was expecting them to do. You don't think there has to be these large institutional resilience training, but organizations they don't need a political system that's going to advocate for them within the organization. What they just need is the organization to support them, obviously have effective and impactful leadership and coaching for them, clear structure to how to achieve and advance and be competitive, so that when opportunities present, they can place themselves. Because that's one of the things that the military does lay out for you through career development plans. They lay the pathway out for you, so you make decisions. And we do make our own decisions on how we want to follow that career path. If you want to spend 8 years in Germany, you're probably not going to make lieutenant colonel. You're not going to make E7 or something like that, or you're going to stunt that growth time that's going to take, because there's a clear path. Again, I think one of the strongest things that I've seen, and I've talked when I'm talking with the entities that I get to work with here in the Tampa Bay area, is that structured onboarding system. I cannot emphasize it enough. Integrating people into the organization and then laying it out clearly is going to absorb that and assimilate quicker. But not to say assimilate, but would be the best way to normalize and integrate them into that culture, that environment. The veteran's going to have buy-in. But here's the other thing: they're going to have a high level of tolerance for it if it's not working too, because many times we've worked places and we've worked for leaders that you can't quit. You just can't quit your job. You don't like it. You get moved to towns you don't like, to where you don't like living in Fayetteville, North Carolina. You act to Honolulu, Hawaii, or San Diego, California. You were ordered to be there, and you accept that, and you integrate, you assimilate, you get into that population, you get into that culture, you get into those bases, and you get into the job. Because at the end of the day, it's about remaining relevant. It's about the right time for the right reasons, with the expectation of common goal.
Yeah. Another good onboarding experience. Glad. What again, transferable skills? What do you see that organizations miss when trying to understand a veteran's experience, skills, or potential? My notes say that, Daniel, you've worked with a lot of special forces people. Those are some pretty seriously skilled individuals.
That's where the Honor Foundation was born out of, is that in the military, all of the skill sets that forces are taught have some sort of technical or operational connection to things industry. Not always completely linear, but there is some touch point. When you say I spent 21, as a Green Beret, 31 years as a Navy SWIC, or 50, or 50, a Navy SEAL, people find that interesting, because there's already a community understanding of what those people do. But as a business leader, when I'm talking to you, I think you're interesting, but what about jumping out of airplanes, shooting guns, diving, and doing these things overseas brings value to my organization, right? And all too often, those things are contextually lost. So I think, organizations often focus too heavily on the technical translation of the military experience and not enough on the human capability that lies underneath it. Many veterans, especially in their resumes, they're not very well communicate to scale what they've done, the complexity or the responsibilities that they have had at their levels, in relatable to those in the public and private sectors. Led teams in really high consequence environments, managed millions and millions of dollars of budget and equipment, management, through, look at the talent, but we definitely do, we also do talent retention at a very high level. And senior leaders, people who are making complex decisions in environments on operational problems or things that are going on globally that not only have, terminal impact, political consequences. How many times have you seen commanding generals and folks within Senate Arms Committees and the staff that sits around them? Those people are being advised by other service members who as we call it, and understand the manning, training, equipment that go along, or they call it the Title 10 responsibilities that go along with that. But because the terminology is unfamiliar, they sometimes miss that experience. Also, a lot of times organizations miss some of the emotional side of the transition, right? Their veterans are often leaving behind more than just a career or profession. They're leaving behind their identity, that community, that tribe that they're around, that reason they showed up every day the way they did. Even when you were not having your best day, you knew that once you were inside it was kind of a game on attitude. And that's who they are for years and years of their lives. So a tendency to assume that, adapt because, he's got determination, he's got focus, he can think, they call this typical training to grab, but resilience doesn't always eliminate the need for support, clarity, or connection, because when you get into the teams, equally trained, again, you can look at people and bring instantaneously what kind of leader they're going to be. So I think sometimes organizations underestimate how much veterans value mission, and those absent veterans tend to disengage quickly and away from that institution, looking for something similar somewhere else, when odds are maybe it was just a misunderstanding on how things were being communicated. And that goes back to that communication piece. And again, it goes back to that integration piece where I think, the portion is so important. So I don't think the challenge is whether or not veterans have value. It's challenge, I think, is whether or not organizations can recognize that value. And then if they have the internal structure, culture, and environment to unlock it for that to work best for them.
Yeah, we have a question from one of our audience members in the chat from Carla, who is a veteran herself. How to take off the psychological ownerships from being a veteran to their new life?
I'll go, since Daniel did a really good job with that last question. It's hard, right? I mean, you're in service, trying to remove the psychological impacts that we have endured, to try mindset and kind of impacts that we've had in service. It's probably up until, I would say, just probably the last 2 years, and I've been out of service for almost 5 years, to really adapt and understand who I was as an individual without a lot of the organizational trauma, for a lack of better words. Like, obviously, I wasn't beaten into who I am today, but like just a lot that goes on in service members and their daily lives with, like Daniel, we leaders, and it just happens because we're taught to put your head down and work through the suck, for a lack of better words, right? You just got to get through it. No matter what, things will change. You'll be gone in 3 years, or they'll be gone in a year, whatever it might be. But understanding that psychological impact that we have faced in service, I think it takes a toll on who we are as individuals. So it's just a matter of us being able to have that time and the support network that we have around us to get through it. Honestly, it's not an easy one, but I always recommend that service members reach out to people to see how they did it successfully. I seek therapy for just the emotional and psychological baggage that I've had in service. But if that's what you have to do, I think it just takes time, and just being able to be who you are and not into branch of service that you were in. It's just going to take time, honestly. It's hard to get by, but you just have to be resilient. That's,
Wholeheartedly. Also tribe, to, do, whether exposure to combat, whether it's, their roles and responsibilities and expectations that, working under those, a few, identity becomes, colonel, when you make colonel, everyone calls you colonel. No one calls you by your name, at home with you. It's a 24/7 job, and it's okay. You have to realize it's okay to and embrace that part of who you are. Don't become something where I let people make it seem like it's, have the value and strength of an identity. Because if anything, I think on the contrary, it shows a greater sense of resilience and adaptability and positivity of character, in my opinion. So maybe sometimes, you can get them all to align and appreciate what the veteran brings and then have some sort of internal structure. But if it's not right, the beauty of being in the private sector, right, is if you don't have to drive in every day and go, oh, my commander is going to ruin my day, Mr. Good Idea Fairy or whatever, soak it up for 24, 36 months. You get a chance in the fence line to say, you know what, right for me, I need to find someplace else with a better structure and just own it.
Yes, or we want to continue to send in questions but in the time, I want to make sure that we all walk away with some practical step that we can, if you can think of one, that we can implement in our organizations, in our consultancies immediately next. What do you have for helping us to better support veterans in the workforce? Something that we can take away. Okay, this is my to-do list next week.
I'll jump in. I'm going to go back to, I think that works best, and I've seen work best, is improve onboarding. And it's not just for like onboarding for veterans. Usually we're onboarding a little bit because we veterans and we wanted to kind of a sense of integration with them. So we assign them mentors and we, chance to see how they're doing after, how they were developing professionally. And have a better understanding of our company and our culture and our, but also works really, really good. Anybody coming in, and it helped with most retention issues because you're starting right out of the gate to set the tone and set the expectation, and an appreciation for the loyalty you expect back from the incoming people that you hire, specifically veterans. I spend their first 6 months constantly trying to translate themselves. They should have the same ability to invest time in helping, whether it's their teams, their leaders, or organization, and about their military experiences. About, hey, tell me an Afghan story. My favorites that Tampa that they like to use is they want to hear what the coolest thing you did in the military was to you. Because he asked me that it has nothing to do with combat. Something to do with, it just kind of opens the and I think it makes the environment feel more personal and connective. And then I'd also, encourage institutions to create opportunities for connection, for to get together. I think veteran valor, things like that. I think they bring a great value into organizations. They don't ever cost them any money. But what you do is you end up getting a brain trust of like-minded individuals in a room who are sectioned in different elements and different responsibilities within that organization. They come together. They're natural critical thinkers, they're natural problem solvers, under stress. And the complaint session, it becomes an exposure of where there could be cracks in the surface or subsurface that allows leaders to, get better with how things are actually running within their organizations. I'm not saying that's only veterans that bring that, but they do have a unique perspective. And when they have some sort of a resource or group where they get together, they can make a major difference. And I think the last thing, ask veterans, that where they're, whatever organization they're working at, ask them what's working and what's not. They'll have respect. Doesn't mean you have to take it. Give their idea of what works and what doesn't work, and leaders will still lead the way they and things out the way they need to move it out, because maybe you don't always understand timelines, responsibilities, structure, personnel, but integrate them, give them some buy-in, and one size fits all in the process. Not all veterans are the same. That we come from every sector of the country. We go overseas. My best medics was from Congo, who was to realm and was duty service to get full citizenship, and he was an incredible our team, and no one looked at him like he was the Congo guy. He was the medic. He was part of our team. And organizations that succeed are the ones that are willing to and recognizing that of much as it is about diversity of skill sets, team means everyone be equally capable, but everyone brings equal value to the team, and just leaning into that kind of a philosophy.
Yeah. Derek, thoughts for?
Yeah, I really drawing on my time, honestly seems like forever ago now, but and with the military connected students on campus, through all the emergent leaders that I have the pleasure of working with and learning from, just to make myself a better leader for my department, veterans encounter during their transition, right? They're not just rooted in whether or not they're capable of doing something, but waters and territories of what civilian workplace culture has, right? And learning how to really translate their experience into the civilian context. I think that's very important. I think we don't have enough people out there that are willing to help mentor. We hear of them, but it's kind of then they're like, oh, you won't go into it. But I think just like into the workplace, whether they spend 1, 2, 20, 31 years in service, leadership experience that we talk about, those skills, those mission oriented, who they are. But I think those strengths can often be overlooked in some organizations that do not fully understand the individual veteran, as well as their military experiences, professional environments. Thrive in organizations that really intentionally communication, those mentorship opportunities for them, a sense of belonging early on, as we had mentioned. Those small efforts really, such as educating supervisors, leaders within the organization on culture, creating peer networks, as I had discussed earlier, and providing really a clear pathway for growth. I think that's very important, can really impact retention and long-term success for the individual veteran.
Bill, did you have a question or comment?
Yeah, everybody into an organization brings culture with them, their culture. It's that what we've just heard in this last hour is a really wonderful tutorial about what good management and good leadership should look like, and it should be everywhere. And how come it isn't? And what can we as people do to try to teach people to do simple things like saying, hey, I expect from you, and what's it that you need from me to make it happen? So thank you very much for what you've done. I've much appreciated hearing the things that you've had to say, because I think you've covered the bases on this, and I appreciate that a lot. Thank you.
You both for us to think more deeply about what it means to integrate veterans into our workforce and be intentional about that. Tonight's yes, Janice.
So of course, we're starting to prepare for this session. The wonderful privilege of talking to both Dan and Derek. And first of all, thank you both for your service. What's out me for this session are 3 things. The first is we got a chance to highlight the work that these 2 gentlemen are doing. And in speaking to both of them, what struck me so much is the humanity behind what they're doing, which I think is so important in all that we do, but especially when we're dealing with our veterans. So the fact that you all are veterans yourself and you thought enough to pour back into the community that you come from, it just speaks volumes to who you are individually. So I just want to applaud the work that you're doing, and thank you all for taking the time to come and be with us tonight. This that stands out to me concerning is how much of a catalyst this conversation is, and bringing veterans back into the workforce is for organizations to do a self-assessment and why you need an IO on staff, or you need to pull an IO in, because it is a true, if you just listen to the conversation concerning why you need to have structured onboarding, and beyond having structured onboarding, once they get in the door, that onboarding needs to match what the culture is and what you're continuing to bring to the table. Because if the onboarding is mismatched, right? If once they get inside, that onboarding doesn't look anything, the culture doesn't look anything like the onboarding, then we still have a problem. So this is a beautiful catalyst for an assessment internal that organizations need to do to make sure that they're creating for these veterans to come in and thrive and live and all of the things is actually in place and ready to receive and retain this. And then the third thing I think that came to me, and I like, this is such a wonderful opportunity, is that somebody listening just found their niche, right? As an IO consultant. Maybe you have a passion for veterans. for veterans. And maybe this is a thing that you want to go into organizations and do. Maybe you want to consult just about how do you prepare organizations to receive veterans into their organizations. So sometimes you don't know what to do with my IO. Maybe this is it. Maybe you want to serve veterans in this way and you want to get with Derek and you want to get with Dan to figure out how you can support their work and how you can partner and do that. So just those are the three things that stood out to me for this session. I am just blown away by what I experienced getting to know you two in the brief time that I got a chance to speak to you, and so happy to hear how this all came together. Thank you all so much.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Janice. I appreciate it. Hey, I'll say this, and this always makes me happy when I do these kind of things and other veterans are a part of it. I've never met Derek. I don't know what branch. I mean, I didn't know what branch of service he served in. But if you listen to our responses and commonality in the culture, this is unique to these two individuals that are with you today. This is more of a normal expectation, normal way of seeing things, a normal way of approaching, becoming a valuable part of that I think the full institution enterprise of the United States military. There's incredible people, and it doesn't matter if they spent 1 year, 31 years, they a little bit bigger than self. But those who've spent a career in it, and this is the misconceptions. I had a great conversation with a senior CEO from a very large organization out in the St. Petersburg area. And he's like, why do organizations have such a hard time getting over the veteran hump? Is it? To me, from what I've heard, it seems to be there's a common theme that people don't recognize that today's military, everyone that's in there volunteered. No one was drafted. No one was forced in there. Their experiences are their experiences. And those who chose to stay and make it a profession and live in the profession of arms and wear the cloth of our nation did so proudly, professionally, and upheld that institution, that organization as a member of it. When that leaves them, they're not lost. They're home. They just need to be repurposed. And when an organization can do that, and I think it's going to be more beneficial and helpful for them if they have someone who can bridge that. And I think that's where the IO professional comes in, is they become the bridge, not a translator, narrator, but someone who just bridge the relationship, bridge the experience, bridge the within the organization that helps them continue to move forward. Back to military veterans will be relevant. They love to be utilized. They love to be engaged. And they expectation, and then you some would argue most of them also love a little bit of autonomy and freedom of movement. Just tell me what you want done. Tell me what my timeline is. What are I have to use? Who are the people that I have? And then just watch them impress you. That's my opinion. And then I know same cloth, and you can just see it from just the way we've engaged today.
Yeah, I just want to add sense a little bit, but what Bill had, like, how can we help? Right? Like, I think it's being there for individuals within the organization. Like, all my employees, I'll be the first one in and last one out. For me, it's something I myself, and it's not because I have to, but I want to, that anybody that comes in my office knows that I'm always there to help, support. Like, again, it's taken up. I'm on my staff, and it's taken about until now where students feel comfortable, because they used to think I was that big bad Marine because I had that stereotype attached to me. I was the drill instructor. I went to the University of Michigan, and I was the one that was yelling at the kids all the time. Yeah, like, I had that without them ever coming to realize who I was. And then as students slowly, I thought you were the scary bad guy or whatever. The big bad, just like approach. It's just me to my community, my people I work with at USF. They're like, I don't see you as a Marine, but I can see the Marine come out it's one of those things. So it's just understanding who you are, developing that professionalism, and understanding the role, like Daniel said, we have to do, and we're going to go and execute it flawlessly. My thing's done in the right manner, and I should ask of you. I'm like, it's just for me. I hate things sitting on my plate, and I'm always the first to respond 24 hours, even if it's after hours for an email. They know that they can reach out to me if something's ever important that they can get an answer to right away. So it's just something that's inbred in us.
Well, thank you both very much for your sharing your light this evening. Strong, but that shouldn't be a surprise because we've got two veterans on the call. Want to remind everybody our next upcoming FIOP events are 2 happy hours, one in Greater Orlando at Luke's Kitchen and Bar on June 3rd. And we're going to head down to the Miami Fort Lauderdale area to South Florida to Janice's home territory. And we're going to STK at Ventura Mall for their happy hour. So be on the lookout for those announcements and join FIOP if you get it. Janice, did you have any parting words?
Yes, if you would, please. We do have a survey.
In the chat.
You
The
did?
survey
Okay. and I
is
did-
asking permissions. So
Okay, we'll make sure that
Link.
anyone with the link should be able to respond. Should be good now. No? Asking for
I are sharing different links. Go with Janice's link.
no,
just-
it's not asking for use that one.
okay, perfect.
Okay, good night. Bye bye.
Guys.
Well,
Thank
good
you.
night.
Thank you. Thank you again.
Thank you.